Do we have to start at 5:15 public comment or finish the meeting by 5:15?
No, start it no later than. Good afternoon and welcome to your Tuesday, September 11th informational meeting. Call this meeting to order. We'll start our first order of business, the administration communication. Welcome, Chief of Staff Erica Beck.
Thank you, Erica Beck, Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office. We started this last week, so hopefully you found it beneficial, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve. But again, this is just an opportunity for the administration to provide you all with kind of an outlook on the next 30 to 60 days and what's coming before you, or other items of interest as well. So I'll try to keep it brief because I know you have a long agenda today. We talked a little bit about last week at the Tuesday night council meeting when it came to the dissolving of one of the TIF districts downtown. We talked about affordable housing, and so I thought it would be relevant today to tell you all about the number of applications that were recently submitted to South Dakota Housing and Development Authority from the city of Sioux Falls. So just a little bit of background on that. The State Housing and Development Authority has a competitive tax credit project, or program, excuse me, and applications for that program are due at the end of August every year. So from the city of Sioux Falls, there were submitted 5 applications. And when I say from the city of Sioux Falls, that's geographic is what I'm referencing. So there were 5 different applications. One is referenced as or named Technology Heights 2, and this will be a project that will be owned by the YMCA. It's located in the northwest part of Sioux Falls. Greenway Apartments is a project that will be owned by Affordable Housing Solutions. It's located on East 26th Street. Irving Center Apartments is a project that will be owned by Sioux Falls Ministry Center, and it will be located just west of downtown in the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood. Marissa's project is a project that will be owned by Call to Freedom, and that will be located in the northwest part of Sioux Falls as well. And then the last is Roseland Apartments, and that will be owned by the Catholic Diocese and located in the northeast part of Sioux Falls. And when I say will be, that is if the State Housing and Development Authority awards the tax credits to those individual projects. And we should know the results of those applications being awarded or not in November of this year. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. I don't think that that topic has necessarily been discussed, but as we continue to talk about the need for various levels of housing in our community, this is one of the things that we'll bring forward to this group so that you're aware of what's going on. One other item that you need to be aware of, and we'll talk a lot more in detail about this coming up here as well, is that on September 18th, there will be a first reading for a lease agreement between the city of Sioux Falls and Raven Industries for parking within the downtown. So right next to the former Parks headquarters, there's a parking lot on the just north of 6th Street. That parking lot has been leased, so to speak, from the city of Sioux Falls to Raven Industries since 2004. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on this. So in 2004, the city exchanged land with Raven Industries pursuant to an agreement to exchange of real property. That agreement contained a provision whereby the city, subject to approval of the city council, would grant Raven a 99-year lease on parking. So the key word there, or the key phrase, is that it was subject to city council approval. So the city council never approved a lease, however, as referenced in the agreement, and it never came before the council, and no signed lease agreement exists. Therefore, this came to light this past spring, when there were parking lot improvements that were being contemplated on that lot. The city found, in coordination with Raven Industries, that this was actually never taken forward to the city council for approval. So in the spirit of that agreement, our city attorney's office has been working with Raven Industries to put together a lease agreement that can be brought forward to the city council for your review and consideration. So that will come before you for first reading on September 18th and second reading on October 2nd. The context for that item will be Don Kearney in the Parks Department, and then Danny Brown also within the City Attorney's Office. So if you have any additional questions, which I'm sure you will, prior to that first reading, feel free to reach out to one of those individuals on that. One other item that I wanted to make you aware of is that the Planning Office, specifically Albert Schmidt and Mike Cooper, anticipate bringing forward an annexation to you all for consideration in most likely November or December of this year. In preparation for that consideration, they have requested time on the October 23rd informational agenda to not only talk about that particular annexation, but talk about the process that the task force discussed heavily in 2017 for annexations moving forward. And so they will be bringing forward more information to this body to talk more about the task force, the thoughts that came from that task force, and then the specific annexation that they will be proposing. And then also just a brief reminder, next week at informational meeting, there will be an update from Matt Nelson from our public parking team to talk about the Village on the River project. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Okay, let's go back to the first thing you were talking about. How does that have anything to do with TIFs?
No,
Oh,
no. This
so-
is a program that's offered by the State Housing and Development Authority. It's called the Tax Credit Program, and it's a competitive program that's offered by the state, and developers and or nonprofits can apply for that program. This happens annually every year. I don't know that we've necessarily talked about it.
Okay, because I thought you referenced we had discussed it last week.
Yep, so when we talked about dissolving that TIF downtown last week, I referenced the program that they were trying to utilize to make that project work within that TIF, and that included tax credits.
Okay, so, all right,
Yep.
thank you. Then, let's go to that annexation issue. Is this going to be a forced annexation?
No, it's my understanding from speaking with Albert that they've been having very constructive discussions with the property owner, and so they anticipate bringing forward an agreement that will not be a forced annexation, that he will be agreeable to this when they bring it forward.
So the property owner is aware that this has
Correct.
been happening, and we're not going to be told that location until a later date?
Correct. Well, I can tell you right now, it's on East Arrowhead Parkway. It's Burns Auto.
Okay, so we actually had talked with him in the past.
Sure. And I know that Albert will present this to you as well, but he provided me today with a list of just contacts that he's had with this gentleman over the last year. So I think they've made some good strides in having that communication, be positive and being able to move forward with the request.
And if I may say, for those of you, and what a nice crowd we have here today. So good to see people here. But for those of you watching, this is a new thing. This is transparency. This is information. This is what we need to do more of in our government. Thank you for doing this, because we're getting a heads up on what's coming down the road. So I really appreciate it, Erica. Thanks to Paul Tenhagen, too.
Thank you, Erica. We will move to City Council open discussion. Any open discussion? Councilor Staley.
I want to give a big thumbs up to Council Member Greg Neitsert, sitting right over there. Council Member Greg Neitsert is the chair of our audit committee. Now, a lot of people in our community, I wasn't aware really of the mechanics of this, but we have an audit committee that is, we've got some staff members hired that are accountable to the City Council. But Greg is the appointed chair. He's working with some citizens on this board and some council members. And since he's taken over, I'm just saying this because we want to model this for more. But Greg has been including us in the conversation. He's been listening and responding to us in the conversation. He's been spending many hours getting this thing organized and trying to get it as full of integrity as he can. And so I want to say publicly, I really appreciate it. I've told him this privately, but he's doing a great job. And so hopefully all of us that are working within the council do that with each other and with the public, because it's your business, it's your money. So thank you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words.
Councilor Kiley.
Yes, I am very pleased to announce that our first ever State Veterans Cemetery is going to be moving forward with the first reading on Tuesday, October 2nd, and then the second reading will be at our third meeting in October, which will be, in this case, on a Monday evening, the 15th, and we moved it forward because of the Chamber annual meeting. So again, first reading on October 2nd and the second reading on Monday, October 15th. And we had discussed internally, and if any of you disagree, please let me know. We thought because I've already done an informational on this that it would be okay to forego that at this point in time. But if anybody has any concerns regarding that, you can let me know. But all the I's have been dotted and the T's are crossed on both sides. And so the city of Sioux Falls will be ready to gift 60 plus acres to the state of South Dakota for the establishment of the State Veterans Cemetery.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your leadership on this. Councillor Starr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Monday, October 8th, 2018, Sioux Falls is going to have our very first Native American Day Parade. A gentleman, Richie Richards from Rapid City, is a reporter. One of the many things that he does, he's a reporter for Native Sun News, is organizing the event. As you may know, back the first Native American Day was started by Governor George Mickelson in 1990 in the year of reconciliation that we had in our state with our Native citizens. The parade's going to start on Phillips Avenue and 14th Street. One of the other things that I wanted to point out is that Mr. Richards did do a meth awareness walk this last spring here in Sioux Falls in the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood, and there was over 100 people that were walking in the neighborhood and pointing out the issues that we do have with meth in our community. And I'm excited that he's put together a great group of people to put this parade together. Having two Native American daughters, it's awesome to be able to celebrate their heritage, their rich culture here in Sioux Falls. And I'd invite all of you to participate, and there will be groups from all over the state that Mr. Richards has invited to be part of it from, and there's prizes and awards, and you'll hear more. And I think in the council email or the CRM system, we've got a thing that has more of the details, but I just wanted to publicly announce this and how excited I am. And it's a first year event, so I know he's very modest about how it will be, but the first year is going to be awesome bringing this event forward in Sioux Falls. Thank you.
All right, we will move on to our first presentation, approving the 2018-2019 CVB bid budget. Terry Schmidt, come on up. As she's coming up, I'll just remind us all that we have a very tight time schedule here today. We need to tentatively be done by 5:30 to make it to our Public Services Committee afterwards. I don't want to rush, but I just want us to be mindful of that. Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon. Terry Schmidt with the Sioux Falls Convention and Visitors Bureau. And yes, I will take my watch off and I will be very diligent. You can gong me when it's time. Okay. Thank you for allowing us to be here this afternoon. We always look forward to being able to share the activities and energies of the CVB and the hospitality industry in Sioux Falls. So we look forward to this actually every year. Okay, the first thing I think I need to talk to you about is that I understand that I had sent a budget over, and then we had to amend that budget. So I need to explain to you why that happened, and I believe tonight at the 7 o'clock, you'll have to, if you so desire, amend the first one that we sent to use the second one. What happened was we go through, as you know, a variety of steps of levels of having our budgets approved. And when we had our bid board meeting last week, which was a special meeting in order to get the bid board to approve our budget, they made a decision that we were not expecting, and that was that the administration side of the budget needed to be shifted so that it was 75-25 with the bid carrying the 75, and they wanted to flop it so it was 66.4% on the bid side, because that's the percentage of our budget that comes from the bid, and leave the 33% over on the CVB side. So we adjusted the budget. We didn't change any amounts. We just shifted some of the expenditures from one side to the other, so that the bid budget was 66.4%. The CVB budget carries 33%. Make sense? Any questions on that? Okay, so we're going to be talking today from the more recent budget, the one that states the 66%. Okay. All right. Just a reminder, why do we have the bid? What is it for? In December of 2011, the bid was created, and the purpose of the bid of the Sioux Falls CVB is to provide funds to the Sioux Falls Convention and Visitors Bureau for the marketing and promotion of the visitor industry in the city of Sioux Falls, and increase the room night sales of lodging facilities within the business improvement district. Of course, knowing that, we know that that money isn't just for the hotels. People eat in the restaurants, go shopping, go to events and activities, et cetera, and it creates an economic benefit throughout the community. If you look at your budget, get through my piles here to get to the budget. Okay. You will see that we are anticipating $1,885,000 in revenue for 18-19. When we received the email from the city telling us what amount to use for this next year, they suggested $2,274,692. We came in at the 1.8, which is a lesser amount of $389,692 based on history and the fact that, as you know, this year things are not running as high in number as they have been. We have seen a decline in room night sales, and we felt it was far more conservative and safe to use that lesser number that was based on history and the actuals of what we have been collecting. I do want you to understand, however, that if we should be so fortunate that everything jumps back up and comes in at a higher level, that we will write yet another budget, go through all the steps, coming here to you for the final okay of any additional monies that might come in. Okay. As you know, the funding for the CVB comes from the bid, $2 per room per night of all hotel properties within the limits of Sioux Falls. Any hotel with 40 rooms plus collects the bid tax from the guest. 40 and below do not pay the bid tax. And then, of course, the room tax is collected that comes to the CVB as well. So we have two sides of budget, bid and CVB. You have asked that we come forward today, as usual, to talk about the bid tax. We have, as of today, 5,153 hotel rooms in Sioux Falls. We know of 498 more that are coming online at this point. We know there's more discussion out there. In fact, I have some developers that want to meet tomorrow morning who are flying in tonight. So we know that there's potential for more out there, which means potential for more guests to come into Sioux Falls. In 2017, from everything that we are able to count, which is about 1/3 of the business, we saw 1.2 million visitors, again, that we could count. Typically speaking, you multiply that by about 3 to get the actual number. So that would put us at about 3 million people who visited Sioux Falls in 2017. In 2016, the number that we could actually count was 1.5 million. For 2017, the economic impact to the community that we could count was 403,482,000 So that is without rollover for 2017. So far in 2018, we have sold 114 new conventions to be booked in Sioux Falls through the year 2025. 62 of the 114 are new business to the community. They involve, they total around $23.5 million in economic impact for the future. We have serviced, which means go out, welcome, greet people, provide name tags, city tours, etc. 91 groups year to date, involving 304,934 people. Average length of stay of a visitor coming in for group business in Sioux Falls this year has been 3 days. The visitor center at Falls Park continues to do well. However, we have seen a decrease in the number of people signing in at Falls Park. The top 10 states who visited Falls Park this year: Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, California, Texas, and Florida. Those are the top 10 states in order. Top foreign countries: number 1, Canada; the second highest, Italy; the third, Australia; then Germany, England, New Zealand, Ireland, Mexico, the United Kingdom, and Bermuda. Interesting. And if anybody thinks we don't have international travelers in Sioux Falls, there's some pretty good proof of that. We also, in the year of this year, have hosted and met with over 50 media journalists, causing us to get media coverage in magazines, television, etc., that we did not have to pay for. It's a matter of us meeting with those journalists and selling Sioux Falls. All right, looking at the budget, I provided you with the summary. You can see at the top, we are anticipating $1,885,000 for income, as I said earlier. The administration, we split with the CVB side, and so you can see that at $879,000. Then we drop down to sales development advertising. Krista is going to pass out a couple samples of ads that we do on a national level. Digital strategy is probably the one you're going to notice the most because it's $445,000. That includes everything that we do in the digital world, from leisure to group sales campaigns, general branding efforts such as our visitor guide and our planner's guide, to targeted persona campaigns and lead generating efforts, various platform expenses to track ROI on all of our campaigns, such as hotel bookings, flights, social media, and leads for sales. We also include in this area new video content creation, enhanced strategic approaches that we plan and are going to work hard and focused on to exceed our goals for this next year. Moving down to printing, $80,204. You'll see $8,400 on the income side. That comes from partnerships. Printing includes everything that we need to do, printing the venue guide, printing sales materials, etc., to put us out in the marketplace. Sales development bidding, as you look down, $106,500. The thing you might notice the most there would be the bidding investments, and then under that a list of 5 groups that we have already committed to in the past years in order to get them here. We pay at the time they are here, not anything ahead of time in case something would happen. Bidding investments at $55,000, that's in case we need to put money up front to get a group into the future. Moving down to sales development travel, bid trips, we've got 2 sales blitzes planned for the coming year. One in DC, which is a natural because that's home of more associations than any place else in the country. And then we're going to blitz Sioux Falls, our own backyard, to find out what you all belong to that we can go after. Trade shows, we have planned at $84,100. That involves 12 shows for the coming year, and they will be shows that take place all over the country, very targeted markets, so that we can focus on specifically the markets that we know will come here. And then miscellaneous travel and a lit swap. Total sales development, $877,000. Down to tourism, travel publications, which are all the publications that are on the tourism, leisure travel side, group tour side. And then South Dakota Tourism Co-ops, they match us at $92,800. And then the total that we spend is $185, including the matching from South Dakota Tourism. That brings us down to the bottom where you can see we have $110,700 in income and $1,116,000 in expenses. And we are writing a break-even budget that we can only hope that we meet. With that, I just wanted to also touch base quickly on the fact that we encourage you. You've all been to CVB council meetings. I think you kind of take turns or something. Please keep coming. You know, we've got 16 to 18 voting members, and we get 80 plus people at every single meeting because they want to know what's going on. They want to be involved. This industry is not the CVB. This industry is the community. We just happen to be so lucky to be able to work for the CVB. So it takes everybody to come together, and those meetings really do bring people together. And the industry people always notice when you're there and very much appreciate the fact that you are there. Partners are critical for us. We have been fortunate to have such good community support and industry support. And I think it really does speak to the fact that we try to keep everything on the table, try to work with everybody, partner with everybody as much as we can. We know that strategic planning is very important as well. Our strategic plan is nearing completion. It has been way more work than we had anticipated, but I believe every minute of it's going to be worth it when the time comes that we roll it out. I think you're going to be very pleased with it, and we hope that we'll be able to get time at a future informational to be able to come and share that with you so you can see where we're going to be focusing in the future. The basis of everything that we do, though, as you know, will be for the betterment of Sioux Falls, all about economic development, driving together with all of our partners to make Sioux Falls a better place. Challenges that we are anticipating in the future. I believe that you've received in the mail, if you have not been at CVB Council, articles on what Omaha is doing, what Oklahoma City is doing, what Minneapolis is doing, what Rapid City is doing. The bottom line for us, two things. One, we have to keep pushing forward on things for people to do, things for people to experience in our community, because that's what keeps them coming back. We have to continue to grow that. The second thing, and this is somewhat of an interesting topic, but we are having trouble booking business because we don't have enough convention center space. Either there's not enough space available or the dates are not available because, fortunately, they're booked. But we need larger space. We can book it. We just don't have the space. So on our lost business list, you would see a lot of groups now that we're losing because we can't even move forward because either there are no dates or we don't have enough space. So we need to think about that. Why is the bid tax and the room tax down? I wish I knew. The only thing I can tell you is that we are not alone in seeing this decrease. We get a report from a company called, it's the Star Report that looks at your competitive set. I can tell you in July, the highest, our competitive set, I'll just read in order from the highest to the lowest in occupancy. And these towns that I read you are our competitive set, most of which we compete against. Except for Rapid City, we really don't compete much with them. But they were the #1 highest, which is obvious in July. Milwaukee was #2, Sioux Falls was #3. Then Madison, Wisconsin, Rochester, Overland Park, Kansas, Fargo, St. Paul, Des Moines, Omaha, and Bismarck. Year-to-date occupancy, Rochester was the highest at only 66.5%. Overland Park, 65%. Milwaukee, 65%. Madison, Wisconsin, 64%. St. Paul 62.9, Sioux Falls 61.6, Omaha 59.7, Des Moines 58.8, Fargo 57.1, Bismarck 54, and Rapid City 54. That's why these communities are building. That's why they're adding things to do and enhancing their destination districts. It's something we need to think about in the future. And I've gone over time, so I have to quit. With that thought. Any questions?
You're just fine, Terry. Thank you for your presentation. Questions from the council? Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Terry, of the 1.6, little over 1.6 million estimated visitors to the city, you're capturing about a third of that for overnight stays. Have you identified what it is that they're staying overnight for, the reason, so that you could build upon that?
Well, I may have not made it clear, Rick. The ones that, when I say like the 1.6, we know that only those are ones that we can count. We know more are staying overnight. We just don't know, they don't register with us, for example. But why are they staying overnight? Corporate, business, activities and events, enjoying the community. Shopping seems to have dropped a bit. Maybe that's online, maybe it's not that we're competing with. Things to do. You know, we've got wineries, breweries, very popular. Our downtown and what's going on downtown is drawing people. Things going on at the event center. Pheasant Fest, to a concert. They come to enjoy the experience.
And of that 550,000 that we know of, are they from the immediate Midwest area, or do we know how far out they're coming from?
Some of them are on a national basis, but mostly if you look like the 5 states off to our east, that's a large draw for us. If you just look at the map and go like this from Sioux Falls, that's a large draw for us. But like Pheasant Fest, they came from everywhere.
May I assume then with our marketing efforts that we are concentrating on that 5-state area to the east?
It is definitely a priority, yes. But we are reaching out further than that too, right. Especially as the market analysis show, you know, whether it's Ohio or wherever, then if those numbers are picking up, or Texas was for quite some time, then there's a more focused effort. And we're almost always in line with South Dakota Tourism, and they have different research than we do, and and it all goes to the same. Excuse me, it all points to the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Terry? Councilor Staley?
Well, let me say, Terry, that I love your energy. I believe you love Sioux Falls. I've known you for many years, but you are very welcoming, but also I've been to her meetings, and Terry doesn't mince words. She tells it straight. And I trust you. I think you have integrity, and I think you're a great leader within your organization. I will say that at the last meeting I went to, you did mention that people are looking for repeat new experiences in Sioux Falls, and I mean it just shouldn't fall totally on your shoulders, but that people, they want to have a variety of opportunities when they come, and so I think looking to expand our town. I know we're doing a lot with the downtown areas with Mr. Joe Batchelor over there, but we've got even more than that within our community that we want to continue to develop. That we're a fabulous place. We care about people. Come and spend some time with us. So anyway, I think you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you. Terry, a couple of things. Help me with a little bit. I know we've had some bad news and some changes that we've had to make some budget adjustments. Give me an idea where we had to make the cuts.
Okay. The city of Sioux Falls notified us back in May that they had been notified by the Department of Revenue that some hotel properties had presumably excuse me, they submitted as hotel tax that should have been restaurant tax. Excuse me, restaurants did. Okay. So they said they went back about 3 years to 2015, and it totaled around a little over $200,000. And their directive to us was that we had to pay it back. So after several meetings and discussions, to be very honest, the Department of Revenue wouldn't budge because we were saying, you know, look, this is your error. What, didn't your auditors catch it? Didn't you catch it? No one caught this. No one caught it. So you have to pay it back. So we had to go back into the budget, and, you know, I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of sales and marketing. So we had to go back and cut that amount out of this year's budget, which was already rough because we were down in collections. Well, lo and behold, last week we got another email. They found another $8,200. So we are dealing with that right now. In fact, right before I left my office, I saw it pop up on my email, and I didn't even open it before I came over here. I don't know what's up. But there's another $8,200. So what we have to do, presumably, is now pay that back as well. We had several discussions. We all worked together to try to, you know, work this out. The best that came out of it was that the Department of Revenue said they would start reporting better to us about the tax dollars, et cetera. And here we are, September, and gee, they found another amount of money, so we're going to be dealing with that. So yes, we had to go back and cut, and now we have to cut more. We made an agreement with them that we will pay back the money, $10,000 a month, until it is totally paid back.
Well, and I think the addition to that is that that money then transfers to the city's entertainment tax fund. So it goes into our third penny fund that we use to fund the pavilion, the zoo, the Premier Center complex, from the convention center to the Premier Center to the arena and the baseball stadium, the Orpheum, and those type of things, which it's probably not good news to you, but to us it's a good news that that fund continues to grow and has a fund balance of over $8.7 million that we've put into the fund balance that haven't used or obligated as part of our budget process either. So one of the things that I'd like to see us do as we continue through the our budgeting process that we do first reading tonight and second reading next week is find a way to help the CVB out in restoring some of that funding, because you're right, it wasn't your mistake. It was, you were operating, and then to go back over several years into the past of trying to claw that money back, I guess is a way of saying it, or reallocate, putting it in what would have been the right place if these businesses would have filled their tax forms out right. Those that have done sales tax before totally understand what it's like to, you know, a lot of times on cities is where it gets moved around. And we always, when we're looking at our sales tax collection as a city, we spend a lot of time saying, okay, these aren't audited numbers and these are audited numbers. So it gives us a little more clarification as we're watching sales tax revenue come in. So be assured we're going to spend some time debating in the next week of determining whether we can reinstate some of that money, because I feel really strongly that what you do, and in this economy, we need to be promoting Sioux Falls. We have a gem, but if we don't tell anyone about it, and we have to continue to make cuts of being able to tell our story, it doesn't matter how great things are here. So there'll be something coming, and this group will be, I can assure you, at least I'll have some amendments to make that move forward to try to put some of that back.
Well, I can assure you, the council, that should you decide to issue some of those dollars back to us, when we wrote our first budget to present to you back a couple of months ago, I always tell everybody, just write what we need. Don't worry about the amount. Just write what we need, and then we'll go back and cut to get to where we have to be. We had to cut over $800,000 to meet budget number to present to you today. We have many plans yet that are in place, ready to go, if we just have the money. So I promise you it would go to good use.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Well, and how ironic that you bring up auditing when I just was giving accolades to Councilor Greg Neitzer for leading our audit committee. It's so important that we do thorough audits. And maybe Councilor Neitzer needs to get into, help out the state's audit committee, because, I mean, they're really, well, but, you know, I mean, that's why it's, you know, I always say, trust, well, they say trust but verify, but I mean, you always just can't trust. You have to get in there and vet it out. So you've done a great job of handling that. Fabulous job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and we'll potentially have more questions for you this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here. We'll move to our next presentation. Welcome, Director Franken. This is the Surface Ambulance Contract Earned Extension. If you could pull them and separate them, then we don't get feedback.
Is that how it needs
Perfect.
to? Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jill Franken, here with you today to talk about our service ambulance agreement, our earned extension. It's time to have those conversations. Gary Myers is also here. He's our REMSA board chair. You've met him before. And you are also well familiar with Mark Postma, Vice President of Paramedics Logistics, DBA Paramedics Plus. And forgive me if I accidentally interchange those two throughout the presentation. I'll try and keep it to Paramedics Logistics, their new name. I also want to let you know that there's other members of the REMSA board here and also partners within our EMS system and our department. So glad to be with you today. So to begin, I'm sure that you are all asking yourselves this question, and that is, why are we engaging in a contract extension discussions already? Paramedics Plus or Logistics has been in place a little over 3 years, and in fact and indeed, it is time to have those conversations. And that is because our agreement with Paramedics Logistics specifically states that if at the sole judgment and discretion of REMSA, the contractor is deemed to be substantially in compliance with the specifications defined in the agreement, the city, REMSA, may grant an extension of the agreement for up to 6 additional years. You may recall we talked about this last October, for those of you who were on the council at that time, that this would be coming up when we did the Contract 101. The city REMSA shall make an offer of the extension by formal written notice to the contractor at least 18 months prior to the scheduled end of the term of the agreement. The offer must be made no later than November 20th of 2018. So we have work to do before the end of the year. So this additional language is also in the agreement. If an offer of extension is made and accepted, an extension agreement will be developed and via ordinance would go into effect on or before May 20th, 2020. If the contractor does not want to continue providing services, they must give notice at least 17 months prior to the scheduled end of the term of the agreement. If an offer of extension is not made, or if an offer is not accepted, the current agreement will expire on May 20th, 2020, and an alternative service will need to be in place on May 21st, 2020. So this time period actually is in our best interest, and it's why it's in place as it is, because as some of you may recall, when we engaged in the RFP process, it took us a full 18 months to get through that work, pretty much from start to finish. So it's an exhaustive process, and it takes that time to be able to transition all those, not just do the RFP itself, but to get all of that transition in place. So at the end of this 18-month period, if it were necessary to transition out, we would need to have all those elements completed and in place. So this just gives you that background that's written into the agreement of our contractual requirements in this area. Now let's next review how we've assured ambulance service compliance is achieved. So there are a number of mechanisms used to evaluate performance and assure substantial contract compliance. This is nothing new to any of you, but it is important that we talk that through. So we have response time and clinical performance, initiation of innovative programs to improve system performance, workforce stability, making sure they have a viable, quality workforce, compliance of pricing, that they are doing everything they can to get those revenues in so that they have enough budget to be able to do the work that they need to, and then compliance with information reporting requirements. So those are the things that they're needing to be accountable for that's written into the contract. A few notable examples that I want to share over the last 3 years of reports that you've already received, but I think it's worth noting. First off, they received a perfect score on their CAS accreditation. We require within 2 years of them becoming a provider, any winning bidder, they were required within 2 years to become CAS accredited. Not only did they accomplish that, I think it was maybe less than that time period, I'm pretty sure, they also did it with a perfect score. Mission Lifeline is a measure of quality and their performance. It's the measure of pre-hospital collaboration around cardiac and stroke care. Remind you that their first year we reported their performance, they were awarded a bronze recognition, the next year Silver Plus, and most recently Gold Plus. So they've continued to improve and be recognized in that area. CARES data, that's that cardiac arrest survivability data that we participate in nationally. In the area that speaks specifically to survival of cardiac arrest that can be helped with defibrillation, in Sioux Falls, in our annual review to you, that measure was at 53% survivability. In 2017, 55%. In 2018, 70% survivability. Compare that to the national average on those 3 years is between 33 and 34%. Another one is pit crew CPR. It might sound like it's, it's really a local effort, and it was really an innovative, believe, effort locally, where our EMS partners all together collaborated on how best to focus the cardiac arrest response. Every single person doing a certain thing a certain way at a certain time in a certain position, and it really demonstrated that collaboration that was needed to be able to manage those cardiac arrests as a team. And so not only do these show and commend the ambulance provider or paramedics logistics, but really of our entire system. And that's can't be underscored enough or emphasized enough that this is about a system. So that includes 911, police, fire, ambulance, and even our emergency departments. So most tangibly that you see on a more regular basis would be our response time data, and I'll just remind you of that as well. And this is a way to get a nice snapshot if you're ever interested in sharing this with people, because I think this gives a really nice overview and trend line of where we're at to just kind of orient you to the slide on the left or the graph. The bottom red line, the static line, is the 90th percentile that they're held in compliance to for all those priorities. For all priorities, and the P1 is purple, the P2 yellow, and the P3 is green, and those are life-threatening emergencies, P1, non-life-threatening emergencies, P2, and non-emergency transports, P3. And this is for their entire time period. It's so starting in mid-2015 to most recently their August report. And you can see, the data points for each month, but then what's so interesting, I think, is the trend lines showing where they've trended from beginning to today in their performance. As a reminder, we use EMS Structured for Quality for all of how we structured the contract in particular, and within that, they do note that the Commission on Accreditation of Ambulance Service recommends an 8-minute and 59-second ambulance response time standard, the 90% of the time for all P1 life-threatening emergency calls. So 90% of the time they have to be responding in less than 8 minutes and 59 seconds per CAS accreditation requirements or recommendations. The lower right, I will tell you, is while it's not a measure that is a compliance measure, it is something that has been, a lot of questions get asked about of you as a council over time, and that is the outliers. And those are those calls that go beyond a certain time period for each of those priorities. And so in that case, we have to, have to pay a fine if they are over that. And so I just think it's important to note that trend line also has gone in a very positive direction. And you can review that. And that's for that same time period from the start of their contract to August. And notably, in the last 4 months, they have had no outliers. So next, we need to assure that we had properly set up the contract compliance monitoring. That's something that we started looking at right away, just to give you a little background again on how we came up with making sure that we're actually monitoring them properly. And so back in 2015, when we awarded the bid and we're starting to work on the contract and getting everything up and running, Julie actually asked our internal auditors that you mentioned, Councilor Staley, and that Councilor Neitzert's involved in. Julie asked Rich Uxel at the time, I think it was, to sit down with her and say, how do we develop the right risk prioritization to make sure that we're really paying attention to those high risk requirements and then work from there. And so that's something that's been developed through the work of the internal auditors and how Julie structures her monitoring. And then also, we also, in addition to that, had a contract completed in 2017 that also just looked in generally, are we then, based on how we set it up, how we're doing things, are we actually completing that accordingly? And the conclusion of that audit did provide that assurance that all those procedures are in place, we're doing all those procedures, we're monitoring the contract as we should be, and that they really notice a really good working relationship to complete all that contract compliance. So we felt really good about that. That was just last summer that was completed. Okay, so then next we go to now the annual performance report reviews. Let's get into the meat of what some of the other things we've done now to get ready to speak before you today. The annual performance report reviews provided to prior city councils in July of 2016, 2017, and 2018. They provided the objective contract compliance evidence for you. So each year you've been given a report or you've been given a review that has been completed. And so that kind of formed the basis of some of that objective assessment each year by REMSA. Additionally, a team of us spent quite a bit of time discussing what else would be important for us to know. What do we need to know about our community? And so we had done a ton of stakeholder interviewing when we developed the RFP and decided what do we need to, how should we structure that RFP? So we talked to stakeholders at that time, and we thought, geez, what best to do but go back to them and talk to them about how are things going and what kind of input would they like to provide to us. These are the folks that we talked to with our stakeholder input. Paul Niedringhaus from Metro Communications, Chief Burns, Chief Goodroad, Dr. Luther, Minnehaha and Lincoln County Emergency Managers, Lynn DeYoung and Harold Timmerman, REMSA Medical Board, which is made up of a whole bunch of folks in the emergency departments and hospital services, Sioux Falls Finance and Purchasing, our city finance and purchasing department, and then Avera McKinnon, Sanford, and Avera Heart Hospital. I'm going to cover a few things that were noted in those discussions up till the hospitals, and then I'm going to ask Gary Myers, who participated in those discussions with the hospital systems, to share some words with you. So first off, with fire, police, and Metro, I'm going to just read off some of these. They feel as if Paramix Plus were really good partners during the 911 software conversion, which occurred not that long ago, and I saw that firsthand. They also have managed response time performance well and actually above contract requirements. That they are collaborative in system quality and performance improvement, such as things like PIT crew CPR. They are responsive, operational. They've made responsive operational adjustments. So things like increasing employee wages, the Harrisburg fire station that they have set up to serve that area south of Sioux Falls as well as in Sioux Falls when needed. Purchase of the paramedic school they felt was really good for the community. And then they're just not aware of any data or evidence that would prevent contract extension up to 6 years. Emergency managers, both Lincoln County and Minnehaha County emergency managers, had no concerns with a full extension. Medical board members also recommended the maximum extension. The positives they said are high transparency, good care, compliance has been really good corporate citizens, managing workforce well, hired ahead of summer turnover, and good leadership were some of the things. They had no negatives to share. And also then purchasing. So they indicated that it would be typical for the finance or purchasing department to support a full extension if the contractor is in compliance with the terms of the contract. That's something they've seen in the past, and they just see that as a course that would be optimal given the fact that they have met all their contract requirements. And they also identified paramedics logistics is now a part of this community. So those were some of the discussions that were provided, or input that was provided by them, and I'm going to have Gary come up and talk a little bit more with you.
Hi, Gary, welcome.
Good afternoon, Gary Myers, REMSA Board Chair. So to pick up where Jill had left off there in the earned extension due diligence, the last three, the talking with the hospitals, our hospital partners, was the piece that I was involved in directly with Jill and Julie, and was one of the more important pieces to me. Obviously, when we look at the numbers through the course of the entire relationship with Paramedics Plus and now Paramedic Logistics, they have far exceeded the contract requirements. And our internal partners in REMSA have continually shown great support as Jill has went through. But what about the feedback from our partners, our other medical partners in the community? So we went and sat with both administrative and clinical leaders at each of the hospitals, specifically the directors of each of the emergency departments, which I really wanted to have personal conversations with each of them, because I know they're the type of folks that don't pull any punches, and we would get honest feedback from them. So we sat down individually with each of those hospital leadership groups, talked through the relationship and the performance that they've seen from Paramedics Plus, Paramedic Logistics over the course of the relationship with the city. We had a great discussion, great back and forth feedback on what they've seen thus far, the relationship that they've had both clinically and administratively, and they had nothing but good things to say. They did offer a few tidbits here and there that they've seen over the years that was good constructive feedback, but by and large, some of the comments that they made, and this is kind of coming from the group of them as a whole, that anytime there was any feedback that needed to get back to Paramedics Plus, it was always received right away, and it was always acted upon right away, whether that was a clinical question or an administrative question. Feedback was always taken right away and acted upon right away. That was something that was very important to the hospitals, that although things do happen, it's how you address those things that happen, whether that's an administrative, an employee, a clinical issue, whatever it may be. It's how you address those things, and they had nothing good but good things to say about how Paramedics Plus, Paramedics Logistics responds to those questions and concerns. The one question that, as we went back and forth and had a good back and forth with the hospitals, that we asked each group was, is there any reason why we, REMSA or the city, should not consider a full extension? And each of the hospitals unequivocally responded with, we do not have any reason why we could not recommend that you do that. So again, specifically asking, is there anything on the horizon or anything that you know about with your operation or the city, or anything that you've seen thus far that you would not recommend the full extension? They all agreed that they would recommend the full extension. So I think that was important, and we wanted to make sure, again, doing our due diligence with the hospitals to get their feedback specifically, because they work with them more than anybody else in the city on a daily basis. So we met on October 22nd. The REMSA board met on October 22nd to review all of this information as a board with our partners and the rest of the board members. And we voted that REMSA finds Paramedics Plus, Paramedics Logistics Now, to be a substantial compliance with the Surface Ambulance Transport Services Franchise Agreement and recommends that the city extend an offer of full 6-year contract extension as allowed in the contract. So that is the REMSA recommendation that we bring to you. Since August 22nd, we did, again, doing our due diligence, about 5 days after our meeting, there was a lawsuit, ongoing lawsuit that we've known about since beginning of last year with the former owners of Paramedic Logistics. There was a settlement reached in that lawsuit, and that information came out about 5 days after the August 22nd REMSA meeting. So I asked that the health department pull together a timeline that we knew about and all the information that could be gathered on that, and that we meet again. So we bumped up the September REMSA meeting to yesterday, so that the REMSA board could meet once again to see if there are any questions, review that report and that timeline on that lawsuit, and see if there were any questions that the REMSA board members had. Mark Postma joined us yesterday as well to answer any questions or concerns that the REMSA board may have. Again, this was a due diligence item because we had made a decision, and then some additional information that finalization or the settlement of the lawsuit came out after that last meeting. So although we were aware of that process throughout the last year and a half, once the settlement was reached, I wanted to make sure that we didn't have any outstanding questions or concerns, which we did not. There was no changes made to our recommendation after the meeting yesterday. So the recommendation stands from REMSA of a full 6-year extension. That is our recommendation to the council. So now I'd like to ask Mark Postma to come up from Paramedic Logistics and talk about that extension as well.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Postma, and I'm the Vice President for Paramedics Logistics. And I know we have a couple new counselors that I haven't been in front of, but I grew up in this community. I grew up in Harrisburg. I spent 3 years on the streets here as an EMT, and I worked for Sioux Falls Ambulance as a paramedic back in the early 1980s. I currently live in our largest operation, Clearwater, St. Petersburg, Florida, and I also oversee this operation. With me is Mike Biro, who is our local COO. Michael worked with me in Florida, and when we were awarded this contract, Michael is our person who's on the ground here. I want to talk a little bit about the 6-year extension. So if you put the first 5 years together with the second 6 years, it's an 11-year contract. Contracting and emergency medical services throughout the United States, the normal contract is 11 years, and there's usually a break in between that. The reason for that is it started about back about 30 to 40 years ago when these contracts were put together. The main reason it was put together is because at the 5.5-year mark, we have to retool this operation. And what we mean by that is all the ambulances that we purchased brand new when we started this contract back in 2015, that we will have to go out and replace all those vehicles. So we have 10 vehicles here. They cost about $120,000 to $140,000 a piece. So we'll have to retool those ambulances, and we'll have to put $1.4 million back into that piece. And then those vehicles will go for another 5.5 years for that rest of that time. All of our other contracts are 11-year contracts, except for one. Our California operation is 10 years, and that's because of a state law in the state of California. It can only be 10 years. So very common in the industry. The second piece of that, for the 6-year, the request on our end also support that, is the infrastructure that we have here. We have an office on 57th Street. We have outgrown that, and we're going to have to get a bigger facility as we continue to grow. When we started here, we had 35 employees. We now have 83 employees. In addition to that, we have purchased the School of EMS from Avera, and we also have that, and we want to actually combine the School of EMS into that. We are the largest EMS educator in the state, and so we are putting those together, but we currently also own the School of EMS. Lastly, most importantly, is I mentioned how many employees we have. We want to continue to invest in their wages, their salaries, which we have tried very hard to bring up to industry standard, and we want to continue to educate them and continue moving this through to decrease the turnover that when we came here was quite high, and we want to continue to invest in our personnel and the infrastructure here in Sioux Falls. So with that, that's a little bit about the extension, and then I'm going to turn it over to Director Franken, and then I will answer any questions.
So in summary, there's a couple things that will be happening or need to happen next, and that is first ordinance reading on this should occur on October 2nd, and then second reading on October 9th. That is the ideal time frame. It's ideal in the month of October only because because of timing of how this ordinance needs to be approved, and then when the contract needs to actually be offered, it gives us that time period that's needed to do that. So that's what's coming next. And in summary, I really just want to say that this earned extension was very carefully crafted, and as you know, it was an industry standard to look at 5 years with an 11-year total contract, but in Sioux Falls we chose to do 5 years with an offer to extend it an additional 6 if their contract compliance was adequate and satisfactory. I just want to tell you that whoever was the winning proposer here in this contract, and it was Paramedics Logistics, that is secondary to the fact they're doing a great job. Don't get me wrong, they're doing fantastic work, and I wholeheartedly support everything that they're doing, and I'm really thrilled that they're providing such great care in our community. But it's the contract itself that assures also that we are able to receive this service. That contract was very thoughtfully written, and we have to really thank Dr. Fitch for helping us to do so in such a meaningful way that gave us the structure that was needed to assure that we have a high-performing EMS system in place. So, and I also want to mention one thing that, you know, everybody talked about, you've heard overwhelmingly here, I think, that folks in our community that we work with have recommended a 6-year extension. But they also recognize that our community is growing and that within that 6 years, probably earlier on than later for sure, that we will have to sit down and really have some thoughtful dialogue as a community, sit down as a city and say, what's next? What happens when that 11 years is up? And start preparing, assessing, analyzing, researching, identifying what does that model need to look like moving forward, and that will need to happen absolutely during that time period. And so to close, you're seeing that someone isn't here this afternoon. I think you were aware of that, and that is Chief Goodroad. He's such an important partner to me in this work and important in the EMS leadership. And he'd planned to be here to share his perspective along with myself, but he was dispatched to service Sturgis today to provide a check to the family who lost their firefighter family member. And so he's there right now delivering that check to them. So he asked me to read the following on his behalf. Counselors, I would first like to say how impressed I have been with the collaborative nature of Paramedics Plus since they began service delivery in our EMS system. We have been able to accomplish service improvements and initiatives as a direct result of their cooperative efforts. The EMS leadership climate is the best I have ever seen in Sioux Falls. Paramedics Plus is held to a 90% minimum standard, yet they continually work toward a 100% compliant goal and often meet those in certain priority calls each month. The private ambulance transport system currently works well in Sioux Falls, and Sioux Falls Fire Rescue is proud to be part of this high-performing system. As our city continues to grow, there may be a point in the future where a private transport ambulance service does not work, and the EMS system will need to adjust, perhaps to a fire department-held service. However, this is not the time for our system. As Sioux Falls Fire Rescue works toward adding a paramedic ALS piece to our system in 2019, this is simply an enhancement to our already great system. Moving all aspects of an ambulance transport capability to the fire department is a very complicated and expensive endeavor and will need to be done properly and should involve planning over a few years to make a successful transition. I would support this transition for Sioux Falls Fire and the city in the future, but now is not the time. I fully support the 6-year contract extension with Paramedics Plus. Thank you, Chief Goodroad. So with that, willing to.
Thank you, Director. I'll turn it over to the council. Councilor Neitzer.
Yes, thank you. I have 2 questions. The first is, does a contract stipulate that it's just a renewal and all the terms stay the same, or can either side open it?
Well, that's not explicit in the contract. Certainly, there will be that opportunity for contract negotiations during that time period if once an offer is extended. I will tell you that we've had a lot of conversation about that, and it would not be my recommendation nor my subject matter experts team recommendation to make any changes. If you remember, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, we designed this, you've read this document, I believe, and compared it to the contract. We designed this based on quality standards, performance standards that are out there in the industry. And so I guess I would say no in my recommendation to making any contractual changes, but certainly that is not an absolute in the contract, that it has to be moved forward as is.
That's what I was hoping to hear. I just wanted to know if there was any stipulation or if it was just going to be scratch out the date and insert new dates. But so, okay. The other question, and this might be for Mark Postma, is, and please don't infer this as being any implication of any firm and whether they're credible or not, but there's confusion of Paramedics Plus and then Paramedics Logistics. Was there like a private equity firm bought out a piece? How do Paramedics Plus, Paramedics Logistics, and East Texas Medical Center, how do all those pieces fit together? Is there any relationship anymore? I think there's a lot of confusion.
Right. So it's a little complicated, and Mr. Bureau brought forward when we actually did the assignment from that standpoint of when we changed over. So Paramedics Plus was purchased. Basically, the assets of the company were purchased by A&M Capital, and they formed the company called Paramedics Logistics. When we did so, we purchased the rights to use the name Paramedics Plus on the go forward, but it is not our plan on the go forward to use the name down the road. There's a plan that we will move to a new name. It's going to be Patient Care. And we've already rolled that out in some of our other operations, but that is what the plan is. It's very confusing. I've worked there 14 years. It's really hard here because all the vehicles say that, but the plan is that the vehicles, with REMSA's approval, that we change those names on there, and you'll see trucks that are a different color with the Patient Care name. And we do not work for Paramedics Plus. We work for Paramedics Logistics. Paramedics Plus is wholly owned by East Texas, which was sold also and really doesn't exist. I mean, they exist, but they are really not a company or a hospital anymore at this time. Yep. Go ahead.
Mike Bureau. Just wanted to add some clarification. You recall back in February when I got up to discuss the assignment, several counselors made statements in concerning whether or not we were going to have a name change. I said at that time I was unsure of the direction. We're going to remain Paramedics Plus. And I believe going forward up to this point, that has generally been our desire to show goodwill and to keep that statement to the council as you guys had requested back in February under that name change. So I just wanted to add that piece.
So the names will change on the trucks as they're replaced, essentially. It'll kind of phase itself out. Is that kind of the?
Well, at this point, we're in early discussions with REMSA. So that name change will need to be approved. Once that step is completed, it would be our goal to go ahead and make that transition, if that's acceptable, to REMSA earlier. We don't need to wait for the replacement of the fleet. We can go ahead and repaint. And if that's the expense that needs to be done, then that's not a problem.
Okay, and then just to make it really simple for everybody, so this would be just like as if somebody came in a private equity firm and bought basically a division of a company or whatever, and kind of took that piece off and essentially made it their own company. And that's what you are now, your own company.
Correct.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Counselor Sale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Franken, I've just got a couple of financial questions. Did you do a financial viability study of the new ownership group?
Every year, we receive their audit, and the finance department reviews that for us.
Of the new, is that available for review?
Those are confidential documents, but I would have to consult with the finance department to see what can be shared, so.
Well, I think it would be appropriate if you're asking the city council to grant an extension that we have the financial information on the company that we're going to possibly give a 6-year extension to.
I'll give you an example of what was done during the RFP process. So,
excuse me, just we're past that because
yeah,
this is a new private equity group?
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to give you though the understanding of how that's structured, the financial review was done by finance, and then Tracy Turbeck at the time gave a report that summarized from his perspective whether they checked off all the boxes, if you will, of their financial performance. And so then every year there's a review done of that company again. And so then the finance department does the same thing each year. But that is not, those documents, that's proprietary information, and so that isn't shared publicly. It's never been shared publicly.
I will say I have a little bit of heartburn with a brand new company coming in talking about a contract extension, and I'm going to pursue that further. Another financial question. Does the ambulance service provide any financial support to our Metro communications?
So
do they currently provide any financial support?
They're in the contract, it was required, and of them to provide a very small payment that covered the cost of them dispatching non-emergent 911 calls. So when Hospital A needs to transport a patient to Hospital B, that is stipulated in the contract that they'll pay a nominal fee. It's very nominal. I think it started out as $5. Counselor Kiley, is that right?
I believe you're correct on that, yes.
Yeah. And then I think then after that was negotiated, then it was slowly increased over time, but still very nominal in fee. But that is, yes, they do pay for the effort that it takes for them to dispatch the non-emergency 911 transports.
I appreciate that. I'll have to follow up with the communications report we had last month did not indicate that there were anything outside of the county and the city. So I'll follow up with the 911 Metro Communications people. My last question, if the council does not approve the extension, where are we in May of 2020?
If they do not approve the if you as a council do not approve the extension, then we will be looking at alternative service provider in May of 2020.
So is it safe to say if the extension is not approved that you would start another RFP process right after the 18-month window goes by?
We would have to start immediately.
Prior.
We'd have to start yesterday, basically, doing that.
Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, and I've got a thought, I need to collect it based on one of your comments, Counselor, but really there's 3 slides here that really demonstrate to me as a counselor the job that our current provider has been, and the services that our current provider has been providing to the citizens of Sioux Falls. And one of them was the last one, the REMSA action, substantial compliance. They found that they were in substantial compliance with the contract. The other slide was the one that preceded that, and that is the earned extension due diligence and the stakeholder input. all of the stakeholders that were contacted support a 6-year extension without any reservation. But really the one, and it should really, when it comes down to performance, the slide that showed the performance trend lines, absolutely every one of them continued to go up. And I'll point out that they are all above 98% at this point in time here. And in terms of the response time, that's going down, which is the direction that we want that to go, obviously. So they have more than demonstrated that they're delivering, that they're meeting requirements in the contract. And regarding, I think maybe some of the pitfalls, and this is what I was going to follow up with not doing the extension, because with the extension, as we discussed, Councilor Neitzer had addressed this in terms of locking in the current terms and moving those forward for another 6 years. Are we sure that is the case, or we're not sure? There still could be room for some negotiation of changing the contractual terms in the extension.
If that's a question, it is certainly at the discretion of the council to consider making changes to any contract between the city and another entity.
Let me put it another way. Would the current provider be in agreement with the current contract terms?
Yes, do you want to hear from them?
Yes, I'd like to have them come up and address that.
So can you restate that question again?
Would you be, with the extension of 6 years, would you be satisfied with just basically the same contract that's in place now and extend that out for the next 6 years?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And so that would be the potential problem area of opening it all up to in another RFP, because now you're starting over from scratch again, and those terms could potentially dramatically change and increase over what they currently are. I, as a counselor, feel very comfortable based on the performance to date and the fact that they're continuing to improve their service to the citizens, as well as working within their own, with their own employees and working on the environment for their employees. I think they've demonstrated that they're doing a great job. I do like the area that we're moving into regarding Sioux Falls Fire Department and the ambulance transport capabilities that they will have. But I would agree that trying to implement something like that now, even over the next 16 to 18 months, would be very difficult for the city of Sioux Falls to get in that 100%. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Staley.
Director Franken, it was rural metro before, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so when that came up that you were going to be looking for a new company, how much lead time did they have?
Oh, they were made aware, the public was made aware when we engaged in a internal audit, which was publicly made available in May of 2013. And that was the audit that made the recommendation that we engage in an RFP and engage in a consultant to develop that RFP.
So they had, and they were also, did they have their bid in too?
Yes, they had.
And I remember when I met with you initially, you told me that actually, and it was Julie Charbonneau was at the meeting, that we were told that company had actually performed quite well.
They met all their contract
requirements.
Yes,
so it was just kind of a need for something new. We're going to put this out and see what's out there. And let me just say, having been on the council for, this is my third year starting, but we've had this contract. We have to give a mandatory 3% increase. There's no wiggle room on this. When they get the 3%, and I have been kind of thinking to myself, gee, I think it'd be kind of neat to, as this contract comes to the end, we can kind of be looking around and see what else is out there. I think it'd be exciting to have another RFP process, and they can put their bid in, and we look at other things. I know there's talk about encompassing our own assets within the fire department to do this. So I'm personally leaning against voting for a 6-year extension. That really ties us up. We're going to be bound in for 6 years after this next year. So anyway, I would love to have us reopen this up. That's what I'm saying.
Any other questions from the council? Otherwise, we'll open it up to public input. Councilor Kiley.
Just a quick follow-up, and I think Councilor Staley brings a good point. I mean, we had somebody before that was meeting the contractual terms. However, this provider versus the previous provider, is it safe to say that they have substantially surpassed the previous provider?
Well, if I'm going to give you an objective answer, I'll do it in form of response time requirements, because as you know, we also had very few, the contract comparison between rural metro and paramedics logistics is vastly different. You could fit their contract in about this much space. The current contract is 711 pages. So there is just no comparison. But the one objective that we can use would be the life-threatening emergency response times, and those, when you compare those, rural metro was running around 92%-ish, and this is taking me back now a way, so I'd have to absolutely, but right around that 92 percentile, right above the 90th percentile, whereas, as you have seen, where paramedics logistics is currently running, and last month, their lowest priority call percentile was 98.1, I believe, and they were at 100% compliance for a couple of the others. So,
okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Brecky.
When you and I went through orientation, I talked to you about the history of REMSA. I was here when it was developed and why it came about, and just how things had changed, in the ambulance service that's being provided and in the fire department over the years. And one of the questions that I had was, is it time to explore the opportunity for the city to provide, that service itself through its fire department? Because, again, back in my memory, that is, when we started, requiring EMTs, and then all of a sudden they became paramedics. And it was not a viable option at that point because we were phasing in those criteria for our firemen, but now we have firemen that are fully capable of performing these functions. So I asked you the question, is it time to have that discussion again? And you gave me a very good answer. I'd like you to, I know that was had a little more luxury of time. I'd like you to kind of share that with it, why you didn't think that was economically viable. I don't know that it impacts my vote today, because if we were going to do something on that, it would probably take us, 5 to 6 years to figure that out, to actually phase something that in if we were going to do that right, because there'd be a lot of planning involved in that. But I would like you to, just take this opportunity to tell the counselors, and the public, basically what you told me when I asked that question.
Well, giving me a lot of credit for having a good memory of exactly what I told you, but I will say that, it's probably no surprise to any of you that that I would, from my personal vantage point as the health director and what I'm able to oversee, that I'm also recommending this as it's been proposed by REMSA moving forward. As far as a public model or fire rescue, I have no doubt that if challenged with doing that and given the opportunity, they would perform. They would, rise to the occasion and do well. We saw that same example in Sioux City, where Sioux City Fire had to take over an ambulance service, but they also know they're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process, and that's not including the investment they had to make to do that initially. There's liability that comes along with this. Now, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question the way you remember it, but certainly the fiscal liability, just the HIPAA liability that now is in place, the Medicare compliance that goes along with billing, all those aspects, which could be done. They are very expensive, and that back end service is one of the things you don't even, really get to see when you're talking about running an ambulance service. But they're very expensive and and take a lot of time and effort to be able to put that in place. There's a lot of considerations around wage that you'd have to take into account. That would be a big change in how you're structuring your wages in a fire department. And, you have to also look at who would be doing those transports that are the most profitable, that help boost your 911 system. Those non-emergency transports that know they're going to get paid by the health systems that pay them for those transports through their contracts, that helps support the 911 system. All those payers, all those folks that aren't able to pay their bill to Paramedics Logistics, it's that service that helps boost that. So would you have our fire department doing all those non-emergency, all those inter-facility transports that Paramedics Logistics is doing right now? So those are all, I hope that covers it. If I missed something, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's what I wanted. I just think it's valuable information for everybody to understand that it's not out of the realm to have those discussions, and we could adopt this for the full extension or a lesser period. It sounds like we have the discretion to do a lesser period as well if we were serious about that, but that there's a lot of moving parts to those discussions, and it's not, that's not an easy undertaking. But I guess I'm still interested in exploring that. At the same time, I see the value of what we have and what, the investment that they've made here. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Well, and of course they've made an investment, but I think they're also making a profit too, and we've never been able to, I've said what's the profit margin, and that's off limits. So we don't really know what's going on with their financial health behind the scenes, because that's just the nature of the contract. So, I mean, it's nothing personal against you guys. If I want to do what's best for our community, I want to do an affordable service, provide that for our citizens. And right now, we are sometimes doubling up when we have the fire department coming on scene and attending to people. But what Brecky just alluded to this, but we could have an amendment then that could make this 1 year extension, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, right? We could change that number if we wanted to. That's correct. And would that have to show up as, then that would be an amendment to the ordinance? Is that, how is that, how would that look?
Yes.
Then we would just change the word, because it's, okay.
All right, is there any public, Councilor Nacer.
I guess I do want to chime in. I guess I'd be really careful about getting in the contract writing business. One thing that was mentioned by Paramedics Logistics was one of the things is they have to make a pretty major capital turnover at a certain point. And if I know my contract is up in a year, it's going to be probably pretty hard for me to make that sort of investment. I'm going to need to have some knowledge that I'm going to have a contract for a handful of years. They may be making a profit, and frankly, I hope they are, because I don't need them to be insolvent, because then we're going to have to swoop in and take over the system. While they are maybe making a profit, they also are carrying all of the downside risk. We're not subsidizing the system, and there's something to be said for that. So I think it's a worthwhile conversation. It should all be on the table, but that should be an incredibly deliberative process, really slow, and that's not going to happen in a year or two, I don't think. So I hope we see a clean contract with just the dates changed, and we can vote on that. Thanks.
Councilor Brecky.
One other question, but not for Jill, if other people have questions for Jill.
Go ahead, state your question.
I was just wanting to ask a little bit more about the lawsuit. Just explain to me, again, understanding that there's confidentiality issues with regard to it, but just explain to me and the public, why we shouldn't be concerned about that. Because you hear something like that in the news, and immediately it goes, oh my goodness, and you want to apply it locally. If it doesn't really apply to what's going on locally, that's great. But I think I just want to give you that opportunity to explain that to me as well as the public.
So we provided Director Franken an email to everyone and explained on behalf of the hospital who took the lawsuit because they wholly own Paramedics Plus. And then also there was an attorney's opinion that was provided to everyone also. And this was a KETAM, which is in healthcare, that's called a whistleblower, former COO of ours in our Oklahoma operation. And we had the profit caps in all of our operations except for Sioux Falls, because that was after we were promoted, myself and the president of the corporation, that we didn't put a profit cap in here, which is why Sioux Falls was not involved with the lawsuit at all. The other ones all were involved with that, and currently there are profit caps throughout the United States. Our competitors currently have them, but we do not. But the DOJ cited that it was a form of the profit cap was not legal in their mind. And if you have the DOJ document, I think it's really important to read the last line in the DOJ document, which was provided, and you can pick it up. It says that the false claims acts resolved by this settlement are allegations only, and there has been no determination of liability. And that's in the DOJ's press release. It's the last sentence from that standpoint. The hospital was sold, who was our wholly owned, and the new owner would not go forward with the purchase, and they were going to have to meet a bond payment. They would not have been able to meet that bond payment, and they would have went insolvent. So they decided to settle the lawsuit ahead of time. But they were ready to defend the lawsuit accordingly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any public inputs on any of the agenda? Seeing none. Councilor Starr had a couple of questions, and I want to honor that. We have just 5 minutes, and then we will adjourn because we do have another committee meeting after this.
Thank you. Mr. Postma, I guess, is where my questions are kind of directed towards. When this pitch was made to the city and when you shared the opportunities, one of the biggest selling points of going with Paramedics Plus was that it was run by a medical center. People who understood medicine, understand healthcare, transportation. They've done it in other places. Now with Paramedics Logistics, it's investment bankers who are out east. How do they understand medicine and the system better than a hospital system with doctors and nurses and things? How would you explain the difference?
The A&M, the PE firm, purchased the assets, but also a majority of the actual folks who ran the corporation, including the president and myself, also were retained by A&M Capital, so we're very familiar with those healthcare laws in regard to that.
Perfect, thank you. And if I'd like Mr. Meyer, I'll say it correctly. I apologize. I practiced, so I tried to get it. I just had a quick question, if you would. One of the things on the slide that really stood out to me that I really appreciated was having an extra meeting. I know what it's like to serve on volunteer boards, and I appreciate the extra effort that the REMSA board took to spend the extra time. But my thing that stood out was that a factual review of the Paramedics Plus lawsuit settlement was done by REMSA. So I'm interested in, as an advisory board, what was that process to go through the factual allegations, and what did you see, and how did that kind of fit? And I wanted to give you that opportunity to relay those to us.
So I apologize if I misstated what we reviewed. We did not review the settlement because the position of REMSA, based on the review of the timeline and the review of what happened and having Mark Postma and the review of the documentation that was available publicly, was that this settlement of the lawsuit did not affect the Sioux Falls operation and would not affect the paramedic logistics operation. They would not be on the hook, so to speak, for the settlement of this lawsuit. So those were the two things that I think that were the most important to REMSA, and we did not do a deep dive into the settlement. We reviewed the timeline of when did we find out, what did we know, what the documentation that Mark Postma sent to us, the documentation that Jill sent to us and to all of you. We reviewed that timeline over the last, since January, or excuse me, I think it was March of last year, and went through all of that, and including to the 5 days after our August meeting, when the settlement came out, and made sure there were no questions, and then had the opportunity to ask Mr. Postma and all the partners, not just the REMSA board, but all the partners had the opportunity to review that with paramedic logistics to see if they had any additional questions. So we didn't get a deep dive into lawsuit because, again, we did not feel it was impactful to the Sioux Falls operation or the community.
Perfect. Thank you. That's good for now.
Perfect, sounds good. And we do have, I want to say thank you for giving us the extra time to dive in, ask questions. I know that was done by design by your department. We do have 3 weeks until the first readings coming forward, so please take the time if you have additional questions to meet with Jill, her team, paramedics, logistics, as well as fire. We will adjourn this meeting. We'll start in about 5-ish minutes if we can.